we see the faults of our parents as being faults of ourselves, which is definitely not true. And that's part of the maturation process, and the adulting process is to actually differentiate what someone told you about you or what you made something mean versus what is actually true, which is that you're a divine being who has the right to feel safe, loved, and to actually say yes or no to the experiences you want to have in your life. And of course, that might have been taken from you.
Welcome to the School of Becoming podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Litt. Hello, beauty. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to say you're welcome to the world before we start this conversation, because the resonance that is happening between me and this magnificent human here, Mr. Mark Groves. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the stage.
Hello. What an introduction. We're already deep in reverence. This is perfect.
Yes. So if you didn't know Mark before now, that's what I'm saying. You're welcome. And that's how, when we first met, it felt for me. You know, we met sharing a stage at Kathy Heller's event. And well, your energy is undeniable, and we both know energy doesn't lie. So there was like an initial like, who are you? Who are you? Hi, let's hug and talk. And then I didn't tell you this, but I'm telling you now. I heard you having a conversation and you said something, I'll tell you what it was. And I thought to myself, I've never heard anybody else say that the way that I say that, meaning have that same understanding and perspective. And you said that, you know, when you orient like a growth journey from your wounds, right? Something to the effect of it's so limiting, right? And the way that I speak to that is like, you cannot do a growth journey from perceiving you need to be fixed or that you're broken, right? And to me, that's the same thing in different words. If you're orienting from a place of these are my wounds, then you are perceiving that there's something wrong with you. And there's really nothing wrong with us. And we can't grow and evolve and contribute to the world the way the world is asking us to actively, individually be the change so we can create the collective change. And that, like, it resonated so deeply. And I was like, okay, we need to know each other deeper. And this is the beginning of that.
I love
So
it.
hi.
I mean, I felt that the first time I met you too, and great hugs. You give really good hugs. So
Thank you.
I was captured into your world through a hug too.
I do have a hug dealer t-shirt that I rock on occasion.
I get it. You can charge a lot. First one's free.
That's right. But if I hold you in excess of 5 minutes, we start billing.
Yeah, we can start billing. I like
So I want to just take a little bit step back and then come up through present.
Yeah.
Take me back to Mark, 5, 6 years old. What were you like, and what did you want to be in the world?
I mean, I was the youngest of three, and I was definitely like super energetic. My nickname was Sparky, and my dad used to joke that they should buy a robot that chased me because I would always like get into playing matches or something where I would somehow get the kid or my brother specifically to have to chase me, and I just happened to be often, I'd say most often, faster than the people chasing me. So there was like I always laugh as an adult that there's like two parts of me, a part of me that likes to poke the bear and the other part of me that likes everyone to like me, and they just don't get along very well, you know. And I'd say as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, very curious about the world. Um, yeah, really. I think growing up as the youngest of three felt like sometimes I didn't get enough space, or that my brother and sister were closer or like colluded. And so there's a bit of that. But yeah, I think by every design, a very human parents, a pretty good childhood, but also, you know, like everybody. I remember the first time I spoke to a friend who was a systems therapist, and I was like, I had a great childhood. And she was like, yeah. And I just hadn't had the opportunity to really explore some of the very like real normal ways that we can be let down just by the circumstances of life and families and work and all the things.
What you're saying is so important, and I'm resonating with that too, because I think we're led to perceive that if we didn't have a big T trauma event experience and our upbringing, then there's nothing there to unpack, right? Or it was just like a good childhood. And it's so important that we highlight that that's not the case. And if you are breathing and listening to this conversation, you have trauma because that's the human experience. And it need not be heavy. It need be awareness. And it's part of the work that you do in helping people understand that and understand what that does. This is my perception of your work, what that does to their relationship with self that then impacts and influences how they relate to everything and everyone around them. So I appreciate that because I don't want anyone thinking, well, if I didn't have some big thing go down in my life, then I'm good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't that so true that if we don't give ourselves permission for our suffering, then it can't be navigated? And, we live in a time where, I've heard that statement of like the oppression Olympics of like who has been traumatized more. And while we can certainly acknowledge words like privilege, etc., it's like everybody has the right to their experience and to, like what someone might call a 1 out of 10 from a trauma perspective, the other person that might be a 10. And that's not
Mhm.
a sign of a like overtly sensitive scale versus not, which is again trying to systemize or create a hierarchy. It just
Mhm.
is. And,
Mhm.
when we can, I worked with a guy once who was like, oh, my childhood was amazing. I had the best. Da, da, da. He never saw his parents fight. He didn't know how to handle conflict. He was conflict avoidant. He had been a doormat his whole life. And I remember when he had this awareness, his like, it's like getting red pilled. All of a sudden you're just like, oh my gosh, because you see the world through this new set of eyes and you want to be able to give this new pair of glasses back or and you can't pretend you don't see what you see. You can't pretend you don't know what you know. And I think it's the very act of pretending that creates so much of the suffering and the doorway for addictions.
The pain, and I see pain as a very beautiful thing. The pain that we have to be willing to experience so that we can see with new eyes, right? And the recognition of how biologically we are wired to avoid that pain. And then all of the different addictions, whether they're, drinking, eating, shopping, but also emotional addictions of how you continue to feel in these ways that are unhelpful for you. I think a beautiful thing is to help all of us understand the requirement of pain,
Right.
right? And that it doesn't necessarily have to turn to suffering, but the pain is inevitable,
Right.
So there's so many things and so many places that I want to go. But where I want to start with is something I actually heard you say on a podcast. It was a solo episode of yours. So I'm gonna drop it here, and then I would love for you to unpack it with me. And you
Okay.
said wounds occur in relationship, and that's also where they get healed. How did you land there?
I heard that from Arvel Hendricks and Helen Hunt, where they said wounds occur in relationship. We're wounded in relationship, and we must heal in relationship. And for me, we could do so much of this work personally, right? Like we can go on the journey and get our poop in a group, be good alone, and then we start dating again or start relating again, and our stuff comes up, and we think and somehow we failed from the lessons and learnings that we had in the time that we were doing it solo. But
Mm,
actually, that's required. You have to like re-enter relationship to be able to actually find resolution and get the evidence of a different version of you.
mm,
And it's easy to have boundaries when you have no one to negotiate a boundary with. It's easy to have boundaries when you don't have someone else's response to it or your fear of people pleasing or whatever it might be. And so you actually require other to become a self. I mean, it's just like the idea of contrast. And it's amazing what happens and what's possible for relationship when two of us relate to each other from this, oh yeah, we've experienced wound in relationship, and actually we have this opportunity now together if we both choose to actually resolve these wounds so we can love from a different place. We can love from a place of wholeness and possibility. And that just happens with the perspective shift. Like, oh, I actually see that the things that come up for us are material for both of us to be better. And then now you're not running from wounds. You're running from like, I'm being informed by, like, I'm informed all the time by my wife. Do I like the information that I get? No, not always, because there's still that part of me that gets defensive, that wants it not to be me. And yet we've been together, I don't know, 9 years now, and it hasn't stopped. If anything, the lessons get more potent.
Yes, yes. That's what a conscious marriage is, right? And I, that's the world that I'm creating every day I wake up and do this work. That's the world that you're creating every day you wake up and do this work. Because when you have two people in a relationship and they are both conscious, it is an entirely different experience.
Way different.
How did you get here, like to focus on relationship and connection in your work in the world? What was that initial catalyst for you?
I always loved relationships. My brother used to make fun of me when I was young. He said that I loved love, uh, which I was like, yeah, I kind of do. His nickname for me, we're only 17 months apart, so you can imagine there's a lot of all of that, was sensitor because I was sensitive, which I think we all are. It's just nicknames like that that desensitize you,
Right.
you know, where I'm shamed for the sensitivity rather than embraced for it. And, that's just part of normal group dynamics and all the things. But yeah, I have very fond memories of my teen years and my 20s, and still occurs today with my dad sitting down on the couch in the living room and talking about relationships, talking about people. My dad worked in research and in cardiology, and he managed like their education space. And so he was like a connector. He like knew everybody, and he was a great connector. He always, all my friends or people who meet my dad always say, your dad asks such good questions, because he just makes people feel seen. So I feel really blessed that I had that as a model, especially of masculinity. And and so that led to me like being in relationship. I didn't start dating till I was in high school, really. And you got like socially, what was also going on at the same time is I'm growing up in the 80s and 90s, and the message about men is that they're bad and they're rapists and patriarchy, etc. So I had this, and my mom, by every design, for sure, a feminist. And so I had this self-perception, or because an adult didn't decipher this for me, I had this idea that boundaries meant being controlling, or needs meant like inconvenience or taking up too much space. And part of that was from my development as a kid in my family system, but was also cultural messages. I didn't want to be like other men.
Mm.
I went through a few relationships I had one in high school for a couple of years, and then one in college. And both of those actually had, fairly significant betrayals. And I went from being like super, like, I would say more anxious, secure, anxious, attached, to avoidant, like very avoidant. I went from like one day trying to figure it out with my girlfriend, and then there being, a significant affair, or really she was dating someone else. And because I didn't process that with anyone, I remember I left the dinner I was at where this information was revealed, and I was forever changed. I mean, I created the unconscious belief that when I love people, they lie to me, they betray me. I lose myself. I lose any access to boundaries or my voice,
Mm.
and monogamy or relationship leads to devastation. And you know, what is another word for that? Like to be totally desecrated. That's what it felt like.
Mhm.
And about a month later, I was out on Halloween, which is not a great holiday to have after a heartbreak, because
Yeah.
everyone's all sexed up and going out and
That's
dressing like sexy everything.
right.
So I go out, and I've never had a one night stand. I've only had two girlfriends really at this point. And I, it's like, take it from me, this is like not one night stand 101 advice, what I'm about to say. So I take home with my friend two girls who are dressed as devils,
Okay.
to which the irony not lost upon me, to my parents' house. Horrible idea. And all the things are happening, systems are supposed to be go, and I can't get an erection. And this has never happened to me before. Like I have no idea. Like I didn't even know this was like possible in the like all systems should have been happening in the organization of intimacy.
Yeah.
And I remember after that, I had a deeper, like I had a lot of shame, and I didn't realize why. That I was like so deeply grieving that I figured out over time that if I drank enough, I could desensitize myself from my own morality. That I
Mm.
could like actually put my body in circumstances my body didn't want to be in.
Mm.
And there, because there was no process for me to differentiate that grief is so important to be felt and held and like really embraced. I ended up in a relationship in college with a really incredible woman for 5 years, and we got engaged. And I didn't want to get engaged. I didn't know why I didn't want to. I could feel like my tension of like she was a good catch, all the things that I was taught, but yet I didn't want. There was like a distance that I had to it. And so when we got engaged, I started reeling. I was like spinning. And everyone would ask like when's the date? And that would just make me so anxious. And so I would talk to people about it, and I remember talking to my dad and he said, "Oh, you're just afraid of commitment." And other people would say that to me too. And my dad was married before he married my mom. He was divorced and then met my mom. And I said to him, "Dad, do you remember what you felt like the day that you married your first wife?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you remember what it felt like the day you met mom and you married her?" "Yeah." "I feel the first way."
Mm.
And he then got it. That was like the moment that he went from like trying to resolve my avoidance to like, oh, he like really needs me here. And the hard part about that circumstance, which really led to me starting my work, was that so many people said to me, "You're just afraid of commitment." And I thought, we want emotionally intelligent men. And then the moment I express my emotion, I'm told I don't actually feel how I feel. And so I posted my story on this forum that was called The Runaway Bride. It doesn't exist anymore. And it was all people who had like left marriages or engagements. And a woman replied to, so many people did, which I was like, wow, the internet is amazing. Because, you know, none of these people cared what I chose, which that was so important to get advice from people like that because they weren't thinking about their own relationships or what will this mean for Mark's friend if he wants to leave me, etc. And so she said, "Could you imagine if she left you tomorrow, would you be okay?" And I was like, yeah, I'd feel relieved. The second question was, could you imagine what it would be like standing at your altar waiting for her, or whatever your altar is? And I was like, wow, that like gave me anxiety. And the
Mm.
third one was, could someone else love her better? And that was where there was this big reorientation to like, I had been only thinking about me and
Yes.
not about actually like what she deserved, that she deserved a man who didn't question, who like, and I deserved that. And of course, the follow up question to that is, do you want to? Because I think that check-in question can be relevant in all relationships at all times.
Mm.
And I didn't want to. And I didn't know why. I just knew I didn't want to. So I ended the engagement and I started to study relationships because I wanted to understand, why did I get engaged when I didn't want to? I wanted to understand marriage. I started to see like, oh my God, so many people around me are so unhappy and in relationship, and we're celebrating them because they're hitting anniversaries, but they don't even like each other. Like that's not success to me. So I started to get pretty cynical about marriage. And I read the book, The History of Marriage by Stephanie Coons. And that all of a sudden made me realize like, oh my God, marriage is an institution. Like it's this And she has this beautiful quote where she says that ultimately the goal of marriage is to get more in-laws. Like from a like relational, societal, like, you marry someone from the other tribe so you have more geography that's safe, you trade resources. And then when agriculture came, you married someone who owned land, not someone who worked on land. So it started to become, and of course was historically, a way to keep social hierarchy. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, now I'm like understanding this. And so when I started to read about relationships and really want to understand them, I was a pharmaceutical rep at the time. That's a whole other world. But I was like deeply interested in manipulating human behavior and how to get people to change their behavior. And at this point, I was like, oh my God, why am I so good at doing that, but not good at talking about my feelings? That doesn't make sense. Like it's not skills, there's something else. And so that like led me on a deep journey. And I started the book. I read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And that was the first time I ever thought that I'm here to do more than be a provider and get a house and have a normal job, etc. And so, yeah, that's how it all began. And it was,
It's so amazing to be in this space time. The consciousness revolution, right, is
yeah,
how I like to refer to it. Um, because when you look at marriage like that and you recognize what it was truly created for, just like education, right? It was industrial revolution. It was built with one singular focus in mind. And now we are here alive now where there's consciousness and awakening and awareness and this focus on actual connection and what that means to heal through things so your heart can be open and you can truly be with another person
yeah,
and then have that nourishment and that satiation and feel love. And to feel love, you have to have the willingness to feel pain
hmm hmm
because, like, they're married.
yeah, they live next door to each other. It's like that's why we don't walk towards love, because we have to walk towards pain. And I think of all those narratives I created about relationship and love when I left that house
Mhm.
after the betrayal. And if we have a community around us, I had community, but I didn't have community that said, whoa, 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 let's unpack this. This isn't yours alone. We've got you. And don't let someone else's behavior then decide the rules you're going to make about love. Like that is like it's just like we do as children, as you know very well know. It's like we see the faults of our parents as being faults of ourselves, which is definitely not true. And that's part of the maturation process, and the adulting process is to actually differentiate what someone told you about you, or what you made something mean, versus what is actually true, which is that you're a divine being who has the right to feel safe, loved, and to actually say yes or no to the experiences you want to have in your life. And of course, that might have been taken from you. And so I want to acknowledge that, the ability to choose. And that's why there's that saying that the opposite of trauma is choice. It's like, how do you insert choice into everything that is in your life? And I remember hearing this quote that everything in your life got there because you said yes to it. And the first part of that is kind of like oh man, that's like a soul kick, and you could just feel it. But at the same time, it's one of those resonant truths that the emotion we get from it is the sense of responsibility we're not taking, but that is available to us. And so whenever you recognize you have choice, you have to process the pain of the choices you've made. And that they have to be walked together, and that's why most people don't walk it.
Yes, 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 yes. Um, this very perceived real, and I say that because everything is perception, right? Nothing is real unless you perceive it to be real. Of what you're going to have to dive into and uncover and feel through and heal uh, keeps us away from that stillness and that sacredness and doing what we need to do to go, wait a second, choice is power rather than choice is fault, right? So much I witness, and I'm curious just to hear your take on this. What stops us from taking deep personal responsibility? Like, actually, I perceive it's because we use it as a way to continue to make ourselves wrong, right? To affirm more fault. Because really, personal responsibility is choice. It's being able to say, I'm a sovereign being
Right.
and I'm choosing things consciously. My soul has been delivering things also by choice, right? Our soul has an objective. We're not, you're here as Mark Robes. I'm here as Tracy Litt in this go round, but we're really spirits and souls jamming out in these meat
Right.
suits, doing what we're doing in this calling. Um, and to operate, because you said the word wholeness, to operate from your wholeness is to take radical personal responsibility and not be available to let the choices you've made as you recognize them make you wrong. What comes up for you when I say all that?
Well, I think the grief that comes forward for everybody to recognize that they were taught wrong, that how to
Mm,
process that, like
yes.
the unconscious becoming conscious and this recognition it always existed and that choice always existed. But that's that split between you're a kid and you don't have a choice of the life circumstances you're in, and so you can't express because it's not safe, or your humor or whatever it is was not allowed, or you were hurt, and so like your actual being was violated. And so there's holding that really sacred tension that all is true,
Mm,
and that it's that idea of like you might not have been able to choose what's happened to you in your life when you were younger, but you do have to choose what you do with it. And I think the real challenge people get caught in there is one, this idea that victim blaming is somehow a necessary part of that conversation. But it's really, you can be the victim of something and also rise from it. You could be the victim of an experience. And so this moment where you go from, I get to actually choose what's in my life, you grieve that you didn't always get to choose what's in your life. And that a lot of your unconscious programming has chosen your partners, has chosen what you tolerate, that this like internalized belief that you have about your value has actually had it. So you've chosen people in your life that mirror a low sense of value. And this is why like all rock bottoms, which can be found, and we think of like waking up in a ditch from drinking too much as a rock
right.
bottom. Right,
Right.
but like a rock bottom can be health related. It could be a breakup. It could be losing a job. It could be. It really starts with the simple feeling that something's off. My work doesn't feel aligned. Whatever it is, and so we wait till these moments where we have to change, which is really indicative that we don't yet recognize we can choose to change. And so we're like pushed to our back against the wall, and then we move into flight or action or fight. Um, and so in the recognition of that opportunity, of that choice, I just like, I always have so much compassion for the level of grief that we have to process, because you might be 72 and be like, I'm no longer going to tolerate bullshit. Now you grieve 72 years of bullshit, and then where you got taught to tolerate bullshit. And we could spend our lives in that. When I first started working, I would say to people, you actually don't need to know where it comes from. And I have, just surrounded by a lot of friends who are therapists. And of course, I was influenced with the thought, yes, you do. You like need to know the pathology of everything. And I kind of adopted it for a bit. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, that's true. Because what happens with context is it removes the sense of blame. So like if I know that I grew up in a childhood that framed me to be a certain way, then at least I could say it's not my fault.
Mhm.
And yet you still don't need to know where dysfunctional behavior comes from to resolve its dysfunction. I mean, this is why I think somatics is such a powerful practice, because like you're bypassing the brain and you're going to move so much quicker than just through something like talk therapy. Not that talk therapy doesn't have a place, but actually like through the practice of words and somatics and like moving through your nervous system, especially because a lot of our experiences are pre-verbal or non-verbal.
Mhm.
So we're actually dealing with things that are a felt sense, not a thought sense.
Yes.
And I think that's where really somatics has really come forward more in the last 5 years, more mainstream. Um, I just can't see how it wouldn't. It has to be complementary or even used on its own. I don't think you can just do talk therapy anymore.
Yeah, this is another moment where I'm thinking to myself, we are the same person in two different bodies, okay? Um, because I have seen and I watch our students have this experience.
Yeah.
I have noticed more and more it is actually the opposite of helpful to try to understand the origin of something and dig into why and where it came from. Number one, because it puts your focus and attention in the opposite of what we're doing, which is creating, right? And um, also, the way that the latest research in memory works is every time we consolidate and reconsolidate a memory, it changes and shifts.
Right.
So it's like, hold on a second, what are we doing? What if we just recognize that the key to this whole show is the body and the thing that's bigger than us, and we only use the mind intentionally?
Right.
And when, right, it's like I'm turning it on to use it deliberately, and then I'm letting it ride, because when we can process whatever that wound is that became trauma physiologically in the body and work with the body and let it go. And to your point about grief, because I'm so aligned, grief is the most stunning
Oh,
of all the human emotions.
juiciest, hardest, but it's
Oh,
like,
all those things.
yeah. Francis Weller says that the soul likes to dwell in the dark.
Mm,
And so I think a lot of that often of like, he says you develop a different vision, eyes that see in the dark. And because we're such like an ascension oriented culture, it's like rise, be better, hero's journey. It's like, what about the descent? Like we have this idea that going down is going to hell. And well, I will agree that grief sometimes
mm,
feels like hell.
mm,
There's a cooking process that's going on. There's an alchemy that, yeah, sure, there's alchemy available through joy, but there's
mm,
also deep alchemy available through emotions that culture has said are bad or negative. And it's like they just all are. They're just your experience. It's like when someone is depressed or anxious, it's like instead of seeing that as evidence of something wrong with ourselves, which is what pharma would teach us,
mm,
it's like, how are you actually functioning perfectly? That anxiety and depression are coming up for you. These are symptoms of something so much deeper, not a deficit or a problem. And you said earlier, like when we recognize marriage and education are these systems that we've inherited. Osho has this great quote where he says, "Why do you need marriage? It's like putting legs on a snake or painting a red rose red. Like, why must you involve the government to validate your love?" And now I recognize the like cultural reasons and the like, relational structure reasons, so not negating those. But I think what's really interesting is like when you actually just wake up to like what is true health, what is nutrition, you realize that all these systems have fucking lied to you and you've been part of this thing. And we could all get caught up in the like sense of needing to be an activist in that. But what that perpetual nature of activism creates, that you're going to get this system back or take it down, is you maintain still being the victim of the system. And you also likely are sliding between, in the trauma triangle, sliding between uh, savior and victim, but never the perpetrator. But yet, obviously, we see in ideological movements that plenty of people are willing to perpetrate to try to resolve a circumstance. And I'd say the best form of rebellion is reclamation of yourself, is to say, okay, all these systems exist and they lie, and like I shouldn't eat high fructose corn syrup, and I shouldn't get captured by my cell phone and get my fucking brain all fucked up and my dopamine pathways. I need to actually reclaim and get sober from everything that distracts me from who I truly am. And then,
mm,
of course, the nervous system goes, oh, like, really, what I'm always asking you is, do you got me?
mhm.
And if you don't, then I'm going to be fucked up and dysregulated. And I'm going to want more high fructose corn syrup. And it's like all these things just hook into all these availabilities from a biological perspective.
Yeah.
And so we have to decide that we no longer want to be part of that.
Yes. Okay. Two things that are coming through. The other part of what you're saying that's so important, which is the calling of each individual person, realizing the essentialism of their own choice to go within, right, and
Yeah.
heal and do all these beautiful things, is the modeling component of what you just said. right? Because it's like when we start to realize more people are, let's say, awakened and healing and all those beautiful things, then what's being modeled is different. So if you're chilling for the weekend with your friends on a trip and one of the people leaves their phone, as an example, in their room and allows themselves to enjoy the weekend in a different place of presence, then that modeling is going to have a ripple effect in maybe one or two of those other people. So, I want everyone so deeply and so badly to realize that their being is their contribution and the modeling of what happens when they allow themselves to evolve and choose. The gift is for you, but it's so much bigger than that.
Right.
It's so much bigger than the individual gains. Like, come on. I want to leave this world new for my kids. You want to leave this world new. We have to do better.
No, I love that. It's like your gifts aren't for you. They're for everybody who needs them. And it's like you're actually not trusting the very evolutionary nature of everything else in nature, which is like, I remember once when my now wife, but when we broke up when we were dating, I was sitting by a river in Mount Baker, Washington, that's like in the rainforest, and I was meditating. And then I see this eagle fly down the river. And then I see a white butterfly who's like flying really slowly in front of me. And I was like, that butterfly doesn't think about what it has to do. Like it just goes. It's like butterflies. I was like, I don't even know what butterflies do. At the time, I had no clue. I'm like, I thought they just became tattoos on women's lower backs, but they actually have a higher function, which is to pollinate flowers. And I remember thinking just like, why do we question so
Mm,
much? Like we have this deep intuitive knowing that we're not in a healthy relationship or we're not making a good life choice or the food we're putting in our body or the lack of movement. And yet the body is and the soul is always actually trying to ripen you. It's always trying to invite you. And of course, we create the exact life circumstances that we need in order to liberate ourselves from all the patterns of fuckery that we've inherited. And it's I really do see it as like you're here, you have the curriculum, you might as well do the curriculum. And I don't like all the curriculum. I actually don't like a lot of the curriculum. But I'm always reminded that when you are liberated from a pattern in a relationship is usually where we think about it because like if it's just a pattern of your own eating, then you're not you're not going to get relational feedback.
mhm,
However, people around you who eat the same way or have the same habits or rituals that you're trying to change will give you feedback, which is trying to get you to stay in the system and stay the same. So if you decide to get sober in a group of people who drink, or you decide to stop eating a certain type of food that's unhealthy for you, you will actually trigger in all the other people around you the mirror that they're not making the same choice, the choice that is about expansion. And so,
mm,
what do most of us do? We contract and we stay the same because we fear that the system will collapse if we don't stay in our role. And I always hate to break it to people, but like mostly what you call your personality is really just adaptive strategies that you've labeled yourself as a perfectionist or an extrovert or an introvert. And not to say we don't have predispositions to certain traits, but it's like at the moment you say, I'm no longer going to not acknowledge dad's alcoholism or mom's narcissism or whatever it is, the whole system is awakened. The whole system is invited to awaken. And that's why we can't go back. And I remember hearing Paul Selig say that it's like being a fish in an aquarium who learns about the ocean, who goes back to the aquarium and pretends they don't know about the ocean. And I think about that a lot of like the black sheep of the family is the liberator of the family, is the one who's saying like, let's go. Like, let's actually stop this. And as you said, it's like that's actually the domino effect of that is what heals cultures, is what heals worlds. It seems like this small act of personal revolution where I'm saying, well, I'm going to be all of me and follow my dreams. But oh my God, that inspires so many people to follow their dreams. If you leave a dysfunctional relationship, people who are in dysfunctional relationships are inspired. She did it or he did it, I can do it. And it's like when you see someone stand up against a system, what it does is one voice gives the courage to another voice, which gives the courage, and then you have an effect. And I think we're seeing this, as you said, the great consciousness revolution. You're seeing this about health now. You're seeing this about an unwillingness to be in cultures that won't allow critical thinking or conversation, which, if that's not indicative of also the micro of relationships that can't handle conflict, I don't know what is.
If I had 17 mics, I would drop them all right now to everything you just said. And we're here to upset the system. That's the point.
Amen.
I mean, hello, the world is fucking screaming, lamenting, starving, flipping out. And how else is it going to be different? The answer, like each one of us that is alive in this space time has a divine moral responsibility as the grown ass person we are to make that choice because you deserve to feel better. You
Right.
deserve to be in your sovereignty. You deserve to heal so that your heart can be open to experience the lusciousness of connection, right?
Amen.
And that's what happened. It's in my book, We're the Human, I talk about it as the drip process, right? Like your great great grandmother drip shit on your great grandmother, who drip shit on your grandmother, who drip shit on your mother. And now here it is on you. And Queen, what are you going to do? You're either going to continue to drip that shit into your kids. And it's not that the drip is never stopping. That's biology.
Hmm.
The question is, what are you dripping?
Right.
And that's where we come into play. Like when I heard you speak before about, like even having your father as a model, right? And who you've chosen to become as a man, as a partner, you are dripping something completely different.
Yeah.
That's the point. That's why we're here, I believe.
I agree. And it's like there's plenty of people. I learned this years ago when I discovered positive psychology, and then all of a sudden I wanted to tell everybody about positive psychology. And I realized like a lot of my friends were like, we're just gonna watch the NFL on Sundays. And I have one buddy who's deeply spiritual, reads the Tao, and he was like, like I know you want to change the world. I just want to have a job and travel and like experience the world. And I'm like, great. But I think like we all think everybody else wants to be happy. Not
Mm,
everybody wants to be happy, and not everyone has the same definition of happy. And like our job isn't to explicitly uh, force somebody to awaken. It is to like do whatever we need to do to awaken and claim ourselves. And if that awakens them, great. If it doesn't, great. I remember Marianne Williamson being asked, "What do you do when you're more conscious than the person you're in a relationship with?" And she said, "Just that question alone means you're not." I was like, "Ooh,
yes.
you know." It's like I think of her and Carolyn Mace being like the Judge Judys of spirituality.
That's so good. That's so good. You said something on the stage when Kathy was interviewing you, and it had that kind of effect on me. You said, if you're in a toxic relationship, you're toxic too.
Yeah, that one's a tough one for people.
It is so spot on. I am 1,000% supportive. Come at me. I'm your bodyguard on this one. Okay. Because number one, it is accurate. Number two, I also say that as the reason it hit me was because the last piece of my evolution was around relationships, obviously, not shockingly. And I was a single mother. My daughter was 8 months old. Like that, no, you don't start to choose to have a family. And now all of a sudden I'm a single mother with an 8 month old. He is complete sociopath, not in her life at all. And then had a second relationship after that with my boss at a company that I worked for. And he was a clinical narcissist. And like all these other parts of my life, I was like, killing it, killing it, killing it, right? All this great.
Right.
And except that component. And when you said that, it actually like, there was like it completed something for me in that moment. Because there was a part of me that had been putting the load specifically on my daughter's father because she's 20 now and she's my daughter. So he's not in either of our lives, but he made her with me. So he's relevant.
Right.
And when you said that, it allowed me to take this interesting, it allowed me to take just like that last piece of my own ownership
Mm,
that I had been throwing onto him because I was part of it.
yeah. Wow.
And it was beautiful. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that because you think of the capacity you've built to be able to hold that. And that's why, that line is generally very confronting because, of course, people say, like, I didn't choose to be in an abusive relationship. And, it's really hard to say, but it's like, if you're in it, you do. And that's not to say that we're minimizing the financial circumstances or any of that. But when we can recognize that we're choosing it with compassion and the small print, then we now can access that we can choose our way out of it. So till we actually acknowledge that we're saying yes to it on even from a trauma-based level, it doesn't matter. It's just like, okay, I said yes. That means I can say, now I have access to no. Without the experience of the awareness, you don't have access to leaving because you don't realize, you won't acknowledge that you're there on your own volition. And of course, that's like if I put that on an Instagram reel, that would probably be quite inflammatory. But that's why it needs all this context to say, like, again, what I said earlier, you could be the victim of something, and yet you still got to do something with the thing. And there's all the reasons that we are templated to be in relationship with bullies or sociopaths or narcissists or abusers or avoidant people or anxious people. And that what that statement really says is like, you just have no choice but to become it. Even if you weren't before, just to be able to entertain it, the other part of a toxic pattern is tolerating toxicity and that like really minimizing of self, which is really fascinating from a like a societal perspective, because if you look at how people talk about relationship, there's a lot of like positive orientation to anxiously attached people. You guys just love more. Like all you want is the best for people. You do all the best work. Oh my God, I see you out there reading all the books, doing all the things. Like you just want that avoidant person to finally show up, but they're fucked up.
Hmm.
And, they won't read a book because they avoid books. And so but when you actually start to bring compassion to like they're both relating to insecurity from a different place. One clings to it and the other one runs from it. Neither is a hierarchy of like positive or negative. They just are. And so I think it's really interesting how we like to moralize everything that we do so that we can like preserve and protect our own righteousness, which is really a protective mechanism so that we don't have to feel something that's hard, which I think is like relevant to society is like we're afraid to actually acknowledge who we can become when we're afraid, sad, wounded, right? But we're all
Hmm.
capable of really atrocious things, which is like a hard thing, I think, for people to recognize.
That moving into the ability to allow yourself to feel all the emotions on the spectrum of emotion is it's so significant. It's such a vital part of the work, right? In
Right.
general. And just like not assessing which version of insecurity is righter or wronger, it's the same thing with emotion. When we can recognize that emotion is energy in motion and we can come from a higher level consciousness on this very human component of feeling, then we allow ourselves to feel it all, the fear and the pain and the vulnerability and the joy and the pride and the love. And in my experience as a student of my own and a teacher to many students, if you don't learn to allow yourself via toleration and expansion of your nervous system to feel it all, then you live in a completely muted emotional experience across the board, right? Most people think, what am I happy if I feel good? I feel good. Like, you're not feeling fucking good because if you're not feeling the rest of it, everything's a muted experience. And
Right.
we deserve, like, as you speak to, and I believe is your book, Liberated Love. Did I
Yeah.
get that right? And it's like, you should feel that. Like, do you remember the Care Bears? Care Bear
Yeah. Yeah. Care
countdown
Bears share.
and the one that shot the heart out of its heart, right? Like it's like that, and emotion is neutral, and the only problem is that you're judging it.
And when we are not willing to acknowledge a feeling without judgment, we can't process the feeling because we already are rejecting it. We're already like, you shouldn't be here. I shouldn't feel this way. And so it's like no matter a lot of people have a hard time processing something like anxiety, let's say, for getting married. And they want to not process it because they fear that the anxiety means that they're not meant to get married, for example.
Mm.
But really, the anxiety is just the doorway to actually dive deeper into what is, because anxiety is a future oriented, generally thought as future oriented. I would argue that anxiety, really at its sort of core origin, is due to not having access to choice, because then you can't steer your life. And then that means a future is being created that you might not fully want, fully sign into. So when you can actually like see anxiety as the doorway, then we go, okay, well, what lives below that? In what ways are you not expressed? In what ways? And it might bring you to like a red flag or an orange flag that's going on relationally, that you're thinking, well, if I'm going to marry this person and commit to doing life with them, then I know that this needs to be acknowledged or resolved. And so what started as something you never wanted to look at could actually be the very thing you need to deepen the intimacy of the relationship. And that's why in the book, my wife and I wrote it together, we talk about how like there's just a deep sense of positive regard for the other person's experience, and that it is actually valid, because like what I've noticed with my wife is that she often sees things in a way I don't see them. So she, what I might get defensive about is actually a gateway to me changing and healing and becoming better, and vice versa.
Yes, because whatever presents is the portal.
Right.
Whatever presents is the workshop. You said the word curriculum, whatever presents is the curriculum. And the only difference is if you're coming from your wholeness and you're conscious, you see it the way we're speaking to it. And if you don't, then you are in a victim consciousness and you are going to feel aggrieved. And you deserve better than that. Like
Yeah.
each one of us deserves to feel liberated, to use your language. It's just, it's such a worthy journey.
It's the best journey, and it's crunchy and it's hard. And I think when we're teasing out old relationships, trying to get them to align, especially romantic, there can be an immense amount of friction, because so many of us have been taught that if your relationship doesn't last, you're a failure. We probably don't want to take up space, etc. So it's like, if a relationship is not for you, it's not for the other person. It's like people just have to realize that, like, as a qualifier for someone to be your person is they want to be your person. It's so simple, but yet I wish I was taught that when I was
Yeah.
18, 19, 20. It's like, oh yeah, like the math doesn't even carry if you don't even have to be good at math to make that make sense.
I do know I used to teach my sister when she was little, if they don't want you, you don't need them.
Amen.
I would
And
just
like
say it to
this
her over and
perpetual,
over again.
right, and this perpetual fighting for is actually what creates the wound that you're not enough and you're not worthy of being chosen. It's like we're just living in this dance of our own suffering, recreating it over and over again. If we just stop, like it's like you said earlier, if you engage in personal growth from a place of brokenness, then the engaging in the growth is reinforcing the brokenness. But if you engage in the growth from the place of wholeness, then all you're doing is revealing what's already there. It's like which I know this story has kind of gotten like more circled in the personal growth space, but it's like when Michelangelo was asked how he carved David, he said, "I just removed what wasn't him." And I think that's exactly what we're doing.
I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yeah, when I heard it the first time, I was like, damn,
Oh
that's
yeah,
true.
I just did something
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah. Yeah. When I heard it, I was like, damn, that's so true. It's like the rock was there and David was inside, and it just took the artist.
I think that is just stunning, and we're going to leave it right there so that everyone can sit with that. And because I could talk to you for hours on end,
Amen.
thank you. Thank you. This was incredibly, incredibly enjoyable. And I know I can sense it's going to be the kind of conversation that continues to make ripple effects every time that it's heard. So I'm just so grateful for your choices to become who you've become and your willingness to continue recognizing that there's an ing on all of this. There's no ed. It's not healed or empowered.